So believing in UFOs or UAP is no longer the kiss of death to your career. We now have pilots and scientists and journalists speaking up. They're not instantly being discredited or mocked necessarily because of that. Just remember back in 2008 when Dennis Kucinich ran for president, Democratic candidate, was in the running against people like Obama and others. And in one of the debates, they used his UFO sighting. He was on the property of his friend Shirley MacLaine. Saw back in 1982 a black triangle along with two other people. There were three witnesses. Kucinich was one. He actually said he felt a mental connection to it. Anyway, that came out during the debate, and it destroyed his candidacy. He was mocked, laughed at. Of course, it was all for obvious political reasons, but that's an amazing thing. That's not that long ago. So we have come away since then. And in addition, there's all this talk, if not action, about the need for disclosure and transparency. You've got politicians like Tim Burchett and Anna Pinalina Luna and others just openly calling for it. Although what we are seeing and what we are probably going to continue to see is a very tightly managed and selective form of disclosure. I'll come back to that. I just want to point out, though, that this type of discussion it's new in some ways, but it's not new in other ways. It's existed under different names for a long time. The whole concept of disclosure, we didn't really start using that word until the 21st century, but the actual concept has been with us since at least the late 1940s, or certainly since the 50s. In other words, the idea of this big reveal that might happen has been circulating for at least that long, for the length of most of our lifetimes here. In fact, I would go further and say that in kind of imminent nature of disclosure was often felt in almost every single decade going back to the 1940s. You could find inflection points in the 1950s and in the 60s and in the 70s, in the 80s and 90s, and in the 21st century where there were people who, with some cause, could feel that we might hit some kind of disclosure or some kind of openness or the end of secrecy and admission, whatever. So it's not that new. What is different is us, our society. So take a look at this graph. If you can pause the screen and study it. Really what it shows is a kind of chart of trust in government. And along with that, I think we can say trust in media too. So we're starting in the 1950s. So the blue are people who are Democrat-leaning. The red are people who are Republican-leaning. And you can definitely see that based on whatever administration was in the White House. Sometimes the red will go up if a Republican is in, and the blue will go down, and then reverse when the Democrats in the White House, and so the blue will go up, and that's all predictable, right? But you can see the general trend has gone way, way, way down, significantly down, from like 3/4 of the people in the 1950s basically saying, yeah, I believe that our system and our government is basically trying to do the right thing, down to where it's in the low minority now. So what we've had is a collapse of trust, clearly. We've had a breakdown in belief over the years. It's in all institutions, across government, across science and journalism, media. It's gone into a steep decline. The belief in we could say a properly functioning democratic system is, one that we want to see as transparent. We don't see that anymore. It's far more controlled and with cause. This is not just like, we're overreacting here. The United States has developed from the 1940s. If you look at the structures that were in place, especially in the 1930s and 20s, and then after World War II, it's very different. And it's continued to grow into what I have called a full-blown national security state. So that's all happened. And as along with that, we're having very strong social, ideological divisions. I don't know for sure that they're stronger now than they've ever been. I mean, you look at the decade leading up to the U.S. Civil War, pretty strong ideological divisions there, which were accentuated by a geographical divide, which really actually made it much cleaner, but also much more dangerous. And there have been other points in American history and where, one could argue, I don't really know if it would be true or not, but you could at least make the case that ideological divides have been very strong. But they're very strong now. In my own lifetime, I feel like they're stronger now than I ever recall them, and you might feel the same. But it's even more than that. It's like we almost don't even agree on what's real. And I talked briefly recently about some modern geopolitical things. You got the war in the Middle East now accelerating. You have the war in Ukraine. I mean, you could take an event that happened, particularly in Ukraine. I've noticed this for the last 3+ years. It's not simply that interpretations can vary about the progress of that war for one side or the other, but literal understandings of specific battles and specific encounters. It's almost like out of the exact same event, you have two different versions of reality that go out there. Now, I will argue here that there is such a thing as truth. Truth exists, independent of whatever we think. But how does one get to it? That's the difficulty, and so I think it's almost more than ideological divide. It's almost to the point of, are we living in separate realities? We cannot agree on what is real. And that is certainly true in the UFO community. Are we dealing with, are these other beings allies or are they invaders? Is this, are they space brothers, or is this all a psyop? And it's all of it. There are no aliens, and it's all Big Brother kind of throwing a head fake at us. I mean, these are significant. You could say they're ideological, but it's perhaps even more than that. So, and then there's another thing. When I hear, I hate to dunk on poor Steve Bassett, but when I hear Steve talk about this, I keep coming back to this idea that we talk about disclosure as if we live in a real democracy. And I will just tell you, that's a very, very difficult thing to argue. You have to really modify your definition of democracy to say that, yeah, we have one. I mean, maybe we can just say everything is along a spectrum. What I would say is that we don't really have a proper working definition of the kind of society that we actually live in. We use old language that doesn't really reflect the actual realities of where we are. We can talk about oligarchy. We can talk about propaganda-based, media-based, ideological control systems. All of that was true. But what we really lack is a kind of shorthand definition so that we can kind of encapsulate the whole system. Maybe because the system's too complicated, but also maybe because when you talk about political scientists, they're all system thinkers, almost every one of them. They work within the system. They're not really designed. They either work at think tanks or in universities. They're really not looking outside the system itself. So there's, I think, a lot of conventional thinking going on in these areas. So I think we're hindered by that. But anyway, so we talk about disclosure as if it's a real democracy, when by and large, I think it's absolutely the case that public influence on major decisions is usually minimal. And I would also say that the way that most people feel, the system feels very insulated and unresponsive. And again, it doesn't matter what political party you belong to here. I think I would say both political parties are extremely guilty of this because they're part of the same system. And I would just say that talk about disclosure usually ignores this reality, that we have a system that is not responsive to us. Now I want you to take a look at this image. I will just say this is a work of art that has been very close to me for many decades. I have had a love of this image for probably close to 40 years. And I'm going to talk about it in the context of our world today. So that is a piece of artwork by one of the greatest artists of the modern era, Francisco de Goya, Spanish artist. It's about 200 years old. It's called, by the way, The Simpleton. And this is, I think it's from Los Disparatos, I believe. He did a series of like dark sketches and paintings in the later part of his life. I think we're talking 1820s or so. So look at that one. To me, this is all about the use of illusion as control. You've got a very, very powerful, kind of not too intelligent looking guy. Looks like he's got castanets and he's dancing, right? And he's happy. He's duh. And in front of him is what I always interpret, and I think, is an image of the Virgin Mary. Behind her is a priest or a person managing that. So he's looking at this beautiful woman, this Virgin Mary type person being manipulated by a power behind, and behind him you can see these images Goya puts in of pain and suffering, essentially. It's genius. It's a genius piece of art. I look at that and I see that is us. That was us 200 years ago. That is us today. A situation in which institutions manage truth through spectacle, in which the public is meant to sustain this system of control. I call it pretend democracy. Both of those words are equally important there. People have to believe that we have a democracy, but it's pretend, man. It's not real. The system needs deception in order to survive. I probably learned this at a deep level for the first time years ago when I read Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent. That just might have been my interest. That and a lot of the works of Gore Vidal, who was, again, one of my favorite guys back in the 80s and 90s. I learned a lot from them. But it's really all about how this system needs deception to maintain itself. And when we talk about the so-called political experts, as I mentioned the political scientists a moment ago, they're system insiders, nearly every single one of them. So they are literally in their positions in order to perpetuate this system. So they're not going to get radical, original analyses, by and large, of the world that we live in from most of those people. So instead of real participation, we have essentially it's these performance spectacles. We just keep dancing while the strings are being pulled. So that's Goya. We don't understand our system.